Welcome, everybody. Very glad to have you all here for our first lunch and learn of our social work month. And we are so excited to have you all with us. Want to begin first by acknowledging that I am in Mi'kma'ki. This is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. Their inherent rights to this land were recognized in the Peace and Friendship Treaties, which Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqiyik, and Passamaquoddy peoples signed with the British Crown from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between multiple nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, and they remain active to this day. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers joins our members and our communities in the necessary labor of reconciliation. We are grateful to live and work together as treaty people in Mi'kma'ki. We know that without action, acknowledgements are empty. Whether you are with us in Mi'kma'ki or joining us from elsewhere, please consider whose territory you are in, your relationship with that land, your relationships with the Indigenous peoples who have lived and continue to live in that place. We invite you to reflect on how each of us, as individuals and as a collective body of social workers, can hold ourselves accountable to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples here and across Turtle Island. Lalu, thank you all. And taking a moment inspired by the Indigenous values and processes upon whose land we are on, let's take a moment to take a deep breath and center ourselves in the midst of all of the wisdom that is with us. So grateful to be here celebrating Social Work Month with each of you. We have awesome door prizes. Today we're going to be giving away 2 conference tickets. We have awesome door prizes for most of our events throughout Social Work Month. We have many events. In particular, I want to call your attention to next Wednesday, March 16th, where we have a day-long advocacy day, where we will be meeting with the Office of Mental Health and Addictions, as well as with other political leaders to advocate for the social determinants of health and for social justice more broadly. We really hope that you will join us. We are also holding many other awesome events. We have another lunch and learn on Wednesday, and it's going to be looking about racism and critical theory and what do we do concretely in our practice. And then Friday, we've got a special self-care mindfulness activity. We want to make sure that you take care of yourselves even as you take care of others. And with that, I am going to stop sharing. And I am going to thank our 2 speakers who are joining us today. You probably know both of them, and they will be introducing themselves shortly. But Alex Stratford probably needs no introduction to any of us, but he is our awesome fearless leader, executive director. And April is not only a private practitioner, but also sits on several of our committees, including chairing our professional development committee. We are really grateful to have both of them with us. And with that, I am going to be quiet and have Alec begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Social Work Month to everyone. It's starting to feel like spring out there. So let's hope that continues and that we find ourselves in continued renewal as spring seems to be upon us. We're going to talk today in a number of parts. I'm going to talk at the beginning today about our current regulation around entry to private practice and some of the considerations that need to be made as you are applying for that. I want to premise all of that with that the college has been in a review of its private practice regulation since 2018, with a report going to the membership at the 2019 AGM. And we are in the process of exploring clinical regulation as opposed to private practice regulation. There'll be more on that in April and into May leading into our AGM, and we are intending more vigorous consultations preliminarily in April and then throughout the summer as we continue to try and figure that out. In the meantime, though, we are currently in this same process of having our current private practice application. And so with that, wanted to provide some context and some just some details as to how the college processes those and what to expect in an application process. Following that, you'll get some very rich information from April on some of the, again, more practical factors of running a private practice. So with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And April, can you see that? I see you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Okay, great. Okay. So as I said, here's what we're going to try and achieve today. We're going to discuss the current regulations, examine the application process, look at how the Board of Examiners evaluates applications, and then April's going to lead us in a conversation about the components of running a private practice and evaluating the logistics of doing that. So to start us off, let's talk with the definition of private practice. The definition starts within the Social Workers Act, and then the board of Examiners developed some more criteria around what is meant by private practice. So in the Social Workers Act, in the definition section, it defines private practice as the provision of social work service by a person who is self-employed as determined by the board. So the Board of Examiners defines self-employment as the provision of social work services set out in Section 5 of the Act, which is the scope of social work practice, in which the social worker is solely responsible for the liability of their practice. So that means, again, you don't have an organization wrapped around you that's covered by director's liability insurance with an apparatus. You are an independent practitioner. Billing a client or a client affiliate organization for the provision of those services. So those two criteria need to be in place to meet the definition of self-employment. So what that means is that many agencies, and as we continue to see particularly these online mental health forms, it is important that folks understand when they would be required private practice registration and when they wouldn't. So many agencies will recruit social workers as contractors rather than hire them as employees. It's important to understand the distinction and be sure of your status. Again, if your agency hires you as a contractor and you aren't considered an employee, you aren't covered for liability by their insurance or by their board of directors, and you're billing for service, then that would constitute private practice, even though you're working with a bigger organization. Again, if you're doing some of those online services, most likely you are being hired as a contractor. So it's important to know the distinction. If you're an employee of an agency, they provide supervision, have you covered under their liability insurance, they're paying you a salary or an hourly wage rather than a fee for service, then private practice registration is not required. If you aren't sure whether the work you're considering would be self-employment, then please give me a call. I'll help in terms of the board's determination of what that could look like. So criteria for entering private practice, and this is the current criteria. So first is that you must be an RSW, so you have to have completed candidacy, and you must be a member in good standing, not subject to any outstanding discipline order. You also must have completed a master's degree in social work from an accredited school of social work. And again, this is an important entry point for private practice, as a master's degree is considered advanced practice. There's a rigor of assessment that's involved in the completion of an MSW that is important to demonstrating competence in social work practice and the competence needed to practice independently and in a private setting. So a master's degree is the entry to practice mechanism at this point in time. Here's where the language gets a little bit more complicated, and this is some of the areas that we're working on right now. So applicants need to demonstrate they have a minimum of 5 years of equivalent hours of professional social work experience. 2 of those years of professional social work experience following the completion of a master's or doctoral degree within the previous 10 years, which is relevant to the areas of specialization in which the applicant proposes to conduct a private practice. Or 4 years of professional social work experience within the past 10 years, which is relevant to the areas of specialization in which the applicant proposes to conduct private practice and which may have been obtained in whole or in part before the completion of a master's degree. Again, some distinctions there. What the board is really looking at, particularly, is a master's degree and experience within your areas of specialization, coupled with supervision and some training in those areas as well. And we'll look at that a little bit more closely in a minute. Again, the experience referred to above must have been supervised or conducted in consultation with another professional with appropriate expertise in proposed specialization. So again, the criteria is that there's some level of supervision to help you develop those competencies required to deliver that specialization. And again, in all cases, that social work experience comes from being a registered social worker and continuing to work within that scope where, again, you can develop those skills. So this is where it starts to get, the board has tried to provide some more clarity on how they are assessing and what they are assessing. So I want to talk first is that the board has distinguished the difference between general practice and clinical practice. And what the board is specifically looking for, particularly in clinical practice, is that you have a minimum of 2 years post-MSW work. Within, again, clinical specializations. And I want to get back to that. So in that category 2, where the board is looking at experience outside of the completion of an MSW, what they are looking at is areas of general practice. And these could include areas like adoption, caregiver support, consulting, community development, parenting support, research, workshop facilitation, or trauma-informed care. Again, where you might have been working with a BSW in these areas and gaining, again, that general experience. If you have that and have done some of these areas and are applying for those of areas within your area of specialization, then the board will consider those towards your approval of private practice. However, experience claimed before the completion of an MSW in the area of clinical social work practice will generally not meet the entry to practice requirement for private practice. The board finds clinical social work practice as advanced practice, which involves an individual and their relationship to the social and economic political structures that impact mental health, emotional, and other behavioral issues. Through use of evidence-based modalities, clinical social work applies mental health assessments, interventions, and prevention practice to achieve optimum psychological and social functioning. And what the board has continuously and consistently said is that experience gained in clinical practice, because it is advanced practice, must relate to the integration of the knowledge and skills gained through a completion of an MSW. So if you are applying for areas of specialization that fall within clinical social work, then again, the onus is on you to demonstrate how you have gained those specializations. But what the board is specifically looking for is at least 2 years post-MSW work within that clinical area of practice. So how the board assesses. Again, it's important that folks recognize that it's upon the applicant to demonstrate their competencies in each of the areas of specialization that they are applying for. So when you apply, what you'll do is you'll download a number of documents, a specialty checklist, which again provides some of the areas that the board would approve specializations is. You can add others there as well. For each of those specialties that you check, you're then asked to complete this longer form. And again, demonstrate to the board your practice experience, your professional development, and your areas of supervision. Again, demonstrating how you've achieved those competencies to be able to deliver that specialization. We're going to talk more about trauma-specific therapy, but here's an example that the board would look for. Is somebody has indicated on their application that they want to be approved for trauma-specific therapy. In that, they've got some models of practice, which they are indicating that they've been trained in. Trauma-focused CBT, a feminist lens, critical race theory. They've then demonstrated different workshops, seminars, training related to that practice area. So level 1 of trauma-focused CBT training, they did in September of 2020 for a total of 40 hours. They've done feminist perspectives on trauma training, about 8 hours in November, and then multiple professional development events on intersectionality and trauma, all listed there in terms of what they've achieved. In terms of their practice experience, what they're stating is that they've been in community mental health with Nova Scotia Health. I keep writing NSH there because the brand changes, but that's England. Mental health therapist from July 2016 to present. So again, been working in the area of mental health therapy. And again, through this role and within this role has delivered trauma-specific therapy to various clients from different cultural backgrounds. In terms of their supervision, they're demonstrating that they have peer supervision at least once a month for the past 5 years regarding some of this, and direct clinical supervision with trauma specialists every 2 months to help develop those competencies. So again, for every area of specialization, you should, again, put some detail about how you've achieved those competencies. What the board, again, will be looking for is a combination of those 3: supervision, training, practice experience. And so what I always say to folks who call, who are putting in a private practice application, is less is often more. You don't have to check every box. Figure out what you want to be delivering and really speak to those in your application. That's what's going to strengthen. Oftentimes, when the board sees that somebody's checked every box, again, there's some questions about how can you have achieved specializations in every single one of these areas. Again, it takes time and dedication to develop skills, to develop your practice. And so that's what the board is looking for and vetting for. So I want to talk a little bit about the direction the board has taken in terms of trauma-specific therapy, which has continued to be a hot topic. I just reviewed Connection magazine this morning, which will be out within the next couple of weeks, which is packed full of content around trauma-specific therapy, around some of the ways to approach it and look at it. And I think will be an excellent resource here as well. But over the last 2 years, again, as political action has taken fold, as we start to recognize the legacy and the impact of enslavement in Nova Scotia, across Canada, the legacy of residential schools, the legacy of continuation of patriarchy, of neoliberalism. Trauma has become much more of a focus in the delivery of mental health services. And so the board recognized that there does, particularly in private practice, need to be a clear criteria around what they would approve in terms of a specialization within trauma-specific therapy. And this was really because, again, there is a lot of risk in delivering trauma-specific therapy, not both to the client and to the social worker, but it's also a complex area of delivery. And so what the board is really looking for is that somebody has invested time and energy to develop the skills necessary to deliver this safely. And that comes, again, from an assessment of a number of things. One is that in terms of the overall board's goal, which is protection of the public, we had a number of complaints that moved into discipline that involved practitioners delivering trauma-specific therapy without any core training and without any core support around delivering that, which led to some pretty challenging results for clients in those regards. And second, the board was seeing a lot of applicants for private practice who were checking the box of trauma-specific therapy, but it also had not been able to indicate where they would have developed these competencies. So the board felt it's in the public interest to put some criteria around what they meant by trauma-specific therapy and put a little more rigor in the process. I do, again, where this language starts to become a little bit less clear is that the board does distinguish the difference between trauma-informed care and trauma-specific therapy. So trauma-informed care is an approach to care. Again, that is embedded in different organizations and services and understands and considers the pervasive nature of trauma and promotes environments of healing and recovery. Whereas trauma-specific therapy is a specific, again, specific set of tools, a specific skill set that involves, again, working with folks who have experienced trauma and, again, working to help them understand it, to build a response to it, and again, making sure that there's good process in delivering that. So there is a distinction between the two. Trauma-informed care, again, generally is considered a generalist area of practice, whereas trauma-specific therapy, again, is, again, an advanced application of mental health therapy that involves, again, political context, social environment, individuals' behavior and responses to that, and how, again, we work with clients to move them through a process safer to develop greater resiliency and ultimately heal. So trauma-specific therapy, in terms of the criteria for demonstrating competence in this area, there are two. There are two pathways that do this. But ultimately, what the board is looking for, as I said, is that somebody has invested energy and time and can clearly show how they would have developed these skills. So one of the first ways that the board recognizes these competencies is if an applicant has completed formal certification in a trauma-specific area, such as, and they were not limited to, a narrative exposure therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or EMDR. And certification generally involves longer-term coursework plus practice experience plus supervision. However, we recognize that those are pretty costly initiatives. They train you in specifics of how you might deliver a modality, but that's not the only way forward. It's important that we note that. Certification was recognized by the board as being an indicator of competence, but not the only. And in fact, most folks have success in demonstrating that they met the minimum standard by showing they have multiple professional development activities on a trauma-specific therapy and different modalities that they might utilize in that trauma-specific therapy. A demonstration of 2 years of practice where they would have integrated that practice into their day-to-day, and of course, clinical supervision. Evidence of the above what the board is looking for is laid out in some high-level competencies. Again, they're pretty high level, but they are minimal standard. And those are in page 5 of the application and renewal policy manual, which you can find on our webpage, and I'll put the link for it here as well. And again, if you what the board would be looking for specifically, and they may ask questions, is how you have achieved, again, some of those skills. But ultimately, again, what they are looking for is that you've invested time and energy and focus in developing the skills necessary. I am going to stop talking there and hand it over to April. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on what I presented, and I'm happy to answer those once April's gone through her content.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. I almost had my own need to go to trauma therapy because I had texted Nadia to tell her my screen went blank and I was having a little bit of a panic here. So now it's back, and I realized that my new computer, my new laptop has a sleep mode attached to it, and it likes to go to sleep. So, you know, to do it on the first time I'm doing a webinar, so a little bit of anxiety, but thanks everybody for attending today. A little bit about myself. I've been in private practice since 2017 here in the Amherst area. I actually got my MSW in 1998. And I remember when I finished my MSW, I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could do my private practice sometime in my later years? And this is where I'm at. So I'm really comfortable with my level of practice. It's been almost 5 years. So I'm hoping to pass on some of my acquired knowledge to today. As you can see, I have put up 5 key components to a successful practice: comfort level, knowledge base, presence, self-compassion, and patience. And I'll tell you right off that those are very, very important as you're going through your growth style and your planning. And you'll notice at the end, I'll explain each one of them. So if we could go to the next slide, Alec. So one of the things that is so important is knowing what your comfort and your needs are. And for myself, I always wanted to do a sole practice, but at the same time, there are other options. So you determine what kind of business model you want. Your sole practice model can be done in a full-time practice or full-time and part-time. A lot of times it starts off feeling like it's part-time, but as you get going, you will build up to full-time. The other type of model that you may be considering is going in practice with a number of other practitioners. So that's called a co-op practice model. And that's where everybody shares the cost of the business. The third type would be a contract model, and that is where you actually sign a contract with an existing practice, and you could be full-time or part-time. But in terms of a contract, you may be owing the agency a percentage of your earnings that goes to the practice because you're contributing to the cost of running the practice, and they will determine how much you get back as your earnings. I put employment model here only because it actually adjuncts to the next one, which is a split employment model. And a lot of times people start private practice when they are working for somebody else. They may start it during their lunch hour. They may start it during the evenings, and maybe they'll do it on the weekends. I'm very familiar with a few private practitioners in the area that work for maybe a local mental health agency. And when I first started out, they were just seeing someone on their lunch hour or maybe just directly after the end of their day. And that worked for them. And so they had a split practice. So they actually had an employer and they were setting up their own sole practice, but it was on a part-time basis. So next slide. So one of the things that is really important when you're thinking about building up your private practice or setting up your private practice is your availability. And that kind of goes with your full-time and your part-time decision. You could start off as a part-time and move into your full-time. My decision was just to make my practice full-time. But of course, you're not seeing clients full-time when you first start out, you're building your practice. But I made my schedule available so that it would include Monday to Friday. And I had select times of the day that I would see clients and select evenings. So I made it a point of having evenings on, say, Tuesday and Thursday, because your clients want a flexible schedule. They want to be able to get in touch with you. And a lot of times people that are working want to be able to see you after they're finished their work for the day. So I found myself having to do a lot of flexibility at the beginning of my practice. Now, other times it could be that it's very strict. So again, this is your decision on how you want to determine your availability and your schedule. The other thing is that what type of sessions did you want to do? So there are practitioners that only see people in person and other practitioners that only do virtual or have a combination. I know myself, I was initially in person and I was very comfortable with that. And then thinking that virtual would be a little bit harder for me to maintain, but with the pandemic, I've become very comfortable with that. So now I have a combined practice. Also, you want to think about your location. So I have 2 offices. I have my main office that is about a couple of blocks away from here. And then I have my home office here. And this is where I do all my virtual appointments. And my other office, my main office, is where I see my in-person. So they have 2 different distinct locations, but sometimes you can just call for one, or maybe you want a combination of both. And next slide. Here is one of the things that you will have to have prior to even seeing any clients. So obviously the first one is getting your license to private practice. The second thing that you need to be doing is obtaining your insurance. So through our Canadian Association of Social Workers, BMS offers a very reasonable rate depending on the package that you pick. So as I put there, about $120 average per year. Again, that is going to be claimable in terms of your taxes for the year. So I just wanted to mention that there. But they offer different packages, whether or not you want to include furniture or you have a person that's going to be working for you. So you may have a dual package. Their site talks about each one of their choices, and it's very well written. But also compare and decide, because when I initially started off with a clinical practice, I actually was a contractor, and I remember having to get my liability insurance, and I got it from a local insurance company, and the cost was about the average that it would be for going through BMS as we are now. The other thing, though, you have to remember is that when you are involved with organizations, EPs, EAPs, or different organizations, they often, or they will want to see proof of your insurance, a copy of your degree and your license before they put you on their provider list. Next one. So I guess the big question is where to find your clients. And when I was building up my practice, I remember asking around how to find clients. And it seemed to have been a very taboo subject because, you know, private practitioners are, you know, you're trying to build your practice. So sometimes maybe sharing your resources might be seen a little bit scary, but I think that we all grow from sharing our information. So finding clients, one of the first things I want to say, and I forgot to put it there, is never underestimate word of mouth. Because when you are promoting yourself and you're telling everybody that, you know, I started a private practice, I'm located here, this is how you can contact me, they remember that. And when they're talking to someone else, they will pass that information on. I've had many opportunities where someone will say, you know, I didn't get your card, but somebody remembered that you had started a practice and I found you through a website, or I actually looked you up in the phone book. I actually, when I first started, my first referral was because someone contacted a family member because they knew somebody and they said, I heard your wife is doing a private practice. Can I speak with her? So it was kind of funny how to start off like that, but it just tells you, you know, I work and live in a small town, and never underestimate the word of mouth. So referrals can come from a variety of sources, but initially I think it was through EAPs that I started. ComPsych and ARET were my 2 main ones. I remember ARET actually called me because they found me on the private practitioners list and asked me to join. So I started seeing clients from that EAP, and then along comes ComPsych. And ComPsych, I did a couple of things. I would see clients, but I'd also do presentations. So never underestimate what an EAP would be willing to pay for. But also be careful with EAPs because there are restrictions. They want to charge you or pay you the cost of what the session will be, and they will set the rate, but always make sure that is that the top rate, because they will always try to give you a lower rate than what you think that you need. But An EAP will not allow you to charge for late shows or no shows or cancellations. So that's limiting your financial resources. Never underestimate the community, spas, physicians, wellness clinics. I put my cards everywhere and anywhere I could when I first started out, and spas, the local spa was a wonderful area to put one because they agreed to put them in their treatment rooms. And when you're getting up, there was my card, or if you're talking to someone at a spa and they know that you're having an issue, maybe you've just talked about it generally, which I'm told happens at spas, they can actually tell you like, oh, well, this person has a card here, you know, if you want to take it, you can take it. Physicians have been a wonderful resource because I went around to as many physicians as I could when I first started introducing myself. And I soon found out that they may have had their favorites of people that were already practicing, but at the same time, I was still given consideration because they would give out multiple cards, and then through those multiple cards, I would get phone calls. Any type of wellness clinic, physio, occupational therapy, go introduce yourself. It is a resource that is untapped because, again, they remember that you took the time to come in to introduce yourself and to talk about your practice. And they, again, pass that on to their clients. Go to the schools. I would go to the local high school and I would introduce myself, and I would talk about my practice a little bit. I would leave my cards, and as that paid off because I found that with exchange students, they have Blue Cross coverage, and exchange students are allowed to connect with local providers. So that was a very interesting feedback on that. Guidance counselors, remember that you took the time to come in and talk to them. The other thing was that I asked if they could put my cards on the boards in the teachers' lounges. And that definitely has paid off because, you know, if you see one client that may be a teacher and they had a positive experience, they will definitely recommend you to their colleagues. Local advertising, bulletin boards, advertising space in banks or local businesses, take out a newspaper ad, all those are well worth it. You could do up a flyer, you could put it next to a bank machine. If you think that you don't want to do that, then find bulletin boards that are in the various agencies around town and put a newspaper ad. It definitely pays off. Go to your local local mental health clinic and your public health clinics and introduce yourself. When I say that I walked a lot, I stopped, I went and spoke with everybody I possibly could. I made a list of who may be in town because I wasn't really familiar with my current area. I wasn't born and raised here. So when I went out, I would introduce myself. I would talk a little bit about my background and also what I could see for my practice, and would just love for them to, you know, think about me when, you know, maybe staff are looking for someone, or if a client, again, wonderful feedback from that. I would say in terms of once you have your private practice license, your insurance, the next thing you should be doing is signing up for Medivive. This is a wonderful resource. This is a portal that I use very, very often. People that have Blue Cross coverage really appreciate it that you can do direct billing. You will then get in touch with Veterans Affairs, looks at the list of who are Blue Cross, who are providers on their portal. And also, if you live in an area where there's active military, they do look at the resources there. So this Medivive, sign up for it. Create a web presence. There are a lot of packages out there, and I think I mentioned it later on, is that when you're building your practice, a web presence these days is very important. I have a number of clients that have reached me through a web presence. Join Psychology Today, contact Sun Life, Lumino. They have a platform that you could be on, and you'll notice that it says fake client. One of the things about finding clients is that you really have to screen your clients. One of the ways that a fake client will try to get in touch with you is through your email. The email that's listed on your website or on your cards, but mostly on your website. I've had at least 5 since I started. It's always from somebody that's from an area that's outside of Canada. They're going to be coming to your area. They're going to be wanting to seek treatment for one of their family members. But what they're really doing is they're trying to get your information on your billing. And they ask very specific questions about, like, how can I bill this for you? Can I pay you up front? And really, it's a front to try to extort money from you. So be very, very wary of those ones. I call them fake clients because they are very, very fake. Next. So determining your rate, managing your fees is very, very important. And I worked on the original private practice committee where we came up with a rate that we thought was good for social workers working in private practice. And as you see that it's $160, that is supported by the college. That doesn't mean that that is the fee that you may want to charge, but that is the one that you will be supported at. When you work in a small town like I do, sometimes maybe 160 seems a fair amount for individuals, and I have received pushback from that, but I can say that my rate is very, very close to that. It's built up over the years, but don't diminish your worth. When I talked about the EAPs, that came from a place of learning because one EAP wanted to pay $90, and you cannot charge anything above that. And if they didn't show, you can't collect any no-show fees. So you have to look at that as on a continuum. Do I want an EAP that will give me $90 to $120? And my regular rate would be $150, $160. VAC, active military, support the $160. Again, EAPs always negotiate the lowest rate that they will try to give you, push until you can't push anymore. In determining your rate, you also have to consider what your costs are going to be. Your room rental, maybe you are going to find a place that you rent per month as opposed to by hour. I was really lucky that when I started out, it was purely by serendipity that I found the location where I'm currently at, and they were charging by the hour. They did not charge by the month. And that gave me the ability to build up my practice. And you can do that with a local practice. You can rent a room for so many hours. And that gives you a little bit of a footing, as opposed to going out and having to pay for a full month's rent. When you're first starting out, it's very overwhelming. But considering the practice costs in terms of percentage for an established practice of in lieu of rent and admin services, advertising, taxes, Canada pension, retirement, all that comes from the fee that you're charging per hour. And determining rate, also collection of fee. If you want to be paid in cash, if you want to be paid in check, if you want to do e-transfer, or if you'll be paid by credit card. I know a lot of individuals use Square. I don't do credit cards at this point. I do everything strictly by e-transfer. And I know I don't have that in there, but I was going to mention that make sure when you do your banking and you're accepting e-transfers, make sure that your account has auto deposit on it. Again, there's a fraud component to anybody that is getting e-transfers, so protect your money. Accept checks when you have to. Older folks give you checks, and sometimes people give you cash. The other thing you want to think about is, are you wanting to be paid in advance, or do you want to pay for that day, or maybe there's a bit of a delay? I have a practice where I make it so that they pay me by the end of the week. And that works well for me, whereas I know that another clinician wants to be paid in advance. And then if you don't keep that appointment, then a percentage of that funds is kept behind. The other thing is that in terms of collecting fees, you may look at, when you're doing Blue Cross billing, there's about a 4-day delay in getting bill out on Sunday, and it's in my account by Thursday. Invoice submission to Manulife, WorkSafe, those take a little bit longer. So you might want to think about, when you're thinking about your weekly costs that you owe and how much you think you're bringing in, think about maybe some delays that might happen in terms of your billing process. Pro bono, I was able not to do it at the beginning, but I do pro bono work, especially if someone's at the end of their coverage and we're almost finished. I have been known to do that, but that is a case-by-case basis. I've also done it because it's a great learning opportunity. But that's at your discretion, and not that I do it very often, but when I do it, it is very specific. No shows, late fees, consider illness, emergencies, and because sometimes when they don't show, or if a health emergency comes up, they really appreciate if you did not charge them, because they will book back in and rather quickly when they can. That builds up your practice, because they tell colleagues. So it's, like you're not charging them for that because there was extenuating circumstances. One of the things about managing your fees is that if you contact any one of the providers that are listed there, that it helps when your clients put in their billing that you were already on the list. That helps them get their money back quicker, which then allows them to come back and see you quicker. Next. So one of the things that is at the top of the list here is expect the unexpected. So I had just mentioned that, delays in payments, last minute cancellations, no shows. Consider your startup costs. At the time when I was starting up, I think I had blinders on when it came to how much it was going to cost me, because between the office supplies, the rent, maybe sharing costs with someone, advertising was a big one. I think I probably could have doubled my advertising budget, but also just life expenses, because if you're thinking of going from an employed position into a full-time private practice, you're going to need a cushion of money to be able to get you through the first couple of weeks until your clients start coming on a regular basis. So in terms of setting up your date time for reviewing and tracking your weekly earnings, again, I do that on a Sunday, send out invoices, make sure that you complete your reports, because the faster you complete your reports, the faster you'll get your money back. But any receipts for income tax and auditing purposes, make sure that you keep those. And next couple of slides, we'll go over that. In terms of understanding your revenues and costs, remember that you're paying your own taxes, you're paying your own Canada pension, and you are going to be contributing to your own private pension fund. So again, that goes back to what you charge per hour, because that all comes out of that particular amount. So again, sole responsibility for your taxes. The best advice I got was from my accountant at the very beginning, who said, didn't matter how much I made. I was starting a practice from, I think, October to December. And his words were, we're taking 30% for taxes, and keep it at that until you get to a point where you may need to either up it or you can decrease it. And mine stayed anywhere between 30 to 35 per year. Also, because you will be including in your taxes at the end of the year the cost of your Canada pension. Set up your Canada revenue account as a bill versus keeping funds in a separate bank account. A lot of times it can be a little bit tempting, and I'll be honest with that about, it's like, oh, well, I have extra funds here. Well, actually you don't. That's your tax money. Pay it directly to your Canada revenue so that you don't have to worry about it when tax time comes. Make sure your accountant is paying your Canada pension. I was worried about that, and I actually asked him if he was paying for my Canada pension, because I was worried that I wasn't contributing. and also determine what your maximum retirement funds could be, and see if you can allot that in your budget. Next. So supplies, I had already hinted at that. Never underestimate your supplies. I have purchased supplies, especially in the pandemic. I spent a lot of money on Lysol and wipes, floor cleaners, but when you're starting, you just never know what you're going to need. So set up your private office just like you would have if you were employed in another organization. Think about the cost of your furniture and your accessories, your lights, your rugs, your chairs, your sofa, tables, anything like that. This is going to cost you money. In terms of visual aids, anything that you could be using to talk about different points with a client. Those are very important to have. I put therapy tools because I am trained in EMDR, so I have the cost of my tappers. During the pandemic, I made a decision not to get an extension and just went with the original form of EMDR, just because I thought the cost was just too much for at that time. But sometimes, you know, you can go through and build up your practice and eventually get different types of tools in terms of your therapy. And then also think about how your documents are going to get to your clients, whether you want to have them on hand in your office, which is going to cost you, you know, some printing fees, but at the same time, think about the difference between either having it at the office or having it electronically. Next. So here's the big one. Aside from finding clients, tax deductions. Keep every receipt you will ever have, because you will never know when that receipt will be used. I have a record in my side filing cabinet here, a file that has every receipt. As soon as I get it, I put it in because I don't want it to be lost. They add up over the year, and all those receipts are deductions for you. Your professional development costs. I know that when we were in our social work conference, there was an individual who was talking about the professional development costs. And I will say that, yes, you are responsible for your professional development. At the same time, why you think it may be a little bit too much to handle during that period of time, look at the longevity, look at the long game for it, because it will help you in the long run when it comes to addressing your clients' needs, but also bringing clients in. Your registration charges from the college, any organizations that you belong to. I belong to EMDR Canada and AMDRIA because of the EMDR. Your practice insurance, your rent is a huge one, your supplies, everything, paper, pen, notepads, Kleenex, Lysol. And I think I actually bought a cleaner for my chairs and that's going to go down as an expense, because anything that cleans your office is an expense. All your advertising costs, anything you do with your laptop for your security programs, they're all tax deductible. Your computer is tax deductible. Your light bulbs that you put in your office and home office or your main office, those are tax deductible. And it's easy for that expense to get lost in a Walmart receipt. So every time I go to get anything like that, I always put my items aside that I'm going to have for my practice and make sure they're on a separate receipt. All your cell phone charges, because that is your dedicated phone for your business, that is tax deductible. Your internet costs for your home office is very much a deduction. And as I said, miscellaneous, light bulbs, maintenance, cleaning supplies, anything. But also the big one is if you have a home office, your heat, lights, your insurance for your home or your apartment, repairs to anything that's to do with heat. So what's included is your office space, your bathroom, portion of your kitchen, your heating, and your lights. You can claim a portion of that based on the square footage. And next.
Actually, I'm going to interrupt for 5 seconds.
Sure. Okay. So back again. Okay. So one of the things that's very, very big with your private practice is how you promote yourself. And remember earlier, I was talking about going out in the community and meeting as many people as you can. I actually was very fortunate because my landlord just happened to be in politics as well as connected to the medical side. So I had a foot up already, but I didn't know that when I met her. So, you know, never underestimate the people that you're going to meet and how they're going to help you with your practice. One of the things though that has been instrumental is my website, and always take the time to see which website is going to be for you. I know I'm in transition from having a website that has a built-in calendar with it to going to a personal website that my daughter will be constructing, although it's a little bit delayed, but that is a personal decision because you can get these websites that are already pre-structured. And when you're starting out, that actually is really, really good for you. And then maybe later on, like I said, I'm almost in practice for 5 years. So when you get comfortable, you can get your own website because you already then at that point know where your practice is going. But make sure that you post your practice policy on your website. It is so important that the structure of the sessions, the cancellation policy, the cancellation fee is all there, and make sure that that goes across every one of your platforms, especially on Psychology Today. But don't underestimate people. Sometimes when they call you, they still have not looked at what your fee is going to be or how long your sessions are. So make sure that you just have a lot of patience with them and go over the costs and the structure of your sessions. Your website, in terms of your calendar, there is a lot of things where they will have reminder notices. I know for mine, there's an extra charge for it, for sending out that reminder notice. So make sure that when you're looking at your website that has a calendar attached to it, if there is any additional fees. But also when you're looking at your open or closed scheduling, sometimes there's an option of where someone can schedule appointment with you. I've chosen not to do that because I want to be able to speak to my clients first and screen them to make sure that I am able to give them what they need in terms of the approach. And if not, then I make recommendations for someone actually that would be able to address their needs. It also cuts down on your cancellations that you get. And schedule in your admin time with your calendar, because if you are currently working for an employer, you know that it's very valuable, that paperwork time. So, and that often is one of the things that I frustrate myself with. So make sure that that's what you do. In terms of advertising options and costs, you know, just on average, Psychology Today costs you about $23 a month. It is a wonderful resource, but those other resources in terms of the advertising, your wellness clinics, your spas, your general practitioners, they don't cost you anything except for a nice conversation with them and the cost of your cards. But in terms of your cards, I found something very interesting the other day that Vistaprint, as you can see, offers Vista Connect. So you don't have to put as much on your card, and you can promote your name and your practice, and the QR code on the back can get screened, scanned, and then they can take it to your website. So that's actually something I'm very interested in. And it keeps your cards simple, because one of the things that confuses clients is if your card is too busy. Next. So here's where regulations and compliance comes in terms of note taking. If you're working for an organization and you're then going to be starting your own private practice, you may be used to how they want you to take your notes. I know that my note taking has changed a little bit in terms of private practice. But also how you take your notes in terms of, there are wonderful transcription pads out there that you could do, but they're kind of costly. So you might want to either look at that as a startup cost and something that you really want to invest in, or you want to put it off and just check out which ones might be better for you, or just rock the traditional paper notepad. In terms of record keeping, I have a filing cabinet that's locked, that sits right next to me. That's where all my files go. So when I go to the office, I take the files with me, and I go over that at the very beginning with all my clients to make sure that they know that their files are kept in a secure place. But also I had spoken with an EAP, it was a federal one, and they wanted me to demonstrate that I had a lock cabinet, that I had a lock on my bag, that I was taking my files to the office. That did not work out because they wanted too much for the amount of money that they were willing to pay. So, but think about having a very secure filing cabinet. I don't put anything in a cloud or anything, and that of course comes with compliance, and the agents at the college would be best to answer those questions for you. But always make sure that whatever product you're going to be using in your practice that is compliant with federal and provincial regulations. The information that you see on screen, I actually got from Jane because I inquired about their services, and I was concerned because when I asked them where their server was, it seemed to be not located within Canada. So, but they were able to give me wonderful information about the different types of acts that you have to be following. Next. And so here's coming to an end, but one of the biggest things that you need when you're doing a private practice is have the support. When I started my private practice here in this very small town, I didn't know anybody, and I thought the best way I'm going to meet people is I'm going to join different committees. So I did that with the college, but I also joined committees in town. They were community-based. I met a number of people that worked in various businesses and made connections that way. It also made you feel more grounded to your community. Make sure that you take care of yourself in terms of attending gym and being physically active, because the stressors of a private practice are real, just like they are when you're in a full-time employment. You need to take care of yourself. Seek out someone as a consultant. One of the things that is a huge barrier to private practice is the isolation that you may feel as a sole practitioner. If you're working in a split practice, you may not have that, but as if you're going to go sole, it's very important that you have someone to speak to consult with cases on. And of course, that is a cost that comes to you. Or if you're really lucky, maybe someone's sharing the space with you, and then you can have someone just to talk to on a regular basis about just how the stresses are going. Lean on your partner, your family, and your friends. They are there. They want to see you grow your practice. And I think this comes to the end of our webinar, and this is where the comfort level, the knowledge, the presence, the self-compassion, and the patience. For your comfort level, be prepared to be unprepared and be uncomfortable. This is your baby, you're growing it. There's going to be growing pains, but stick with it. And that's where the patience comes in, because don't give up. Be kind to yourself, because there is going to be a couple of nights or that maybe you feel like this is not for me, but keep pushing through, because it is well worth it. But join those community groups, get connected with your community. It's very important, and learn as much as you can about creating and building your business.
Thank you so much, April. And we are going to open up for questions in a few moments. We're going to stop recording in a few moments as well. But for now, before I stop recording, Alec, do you have any comments that you wanted to make before I stop recording and open it up to questions, which is why it's always good to attend live, even though we do offer recordings.
I don't have anything to add right now. I'm certainly available to answer any questions. And if folks have questions, you don't feel like you need to ask them here, you can reach out to me as well. I'm happy to have a phone call with you.